Is Zelensky's offensive into the Kursk area in southern Russia, is it going to backfire or is it going to blow up in Putin's face? Well, I think if you've been paying any attention to our channel for very long, you know where I'm coming down on this, and it is definitely not good for the Ukraine side. Folks, I'm coming to you live from Germany, just outside of Munich near the airport, where I'm still on vacation with my family, but some things have been happening in this that I just feel it's too important just to stay on the sidelines any longer. It's been driving me crazy, some of the things I've seen and some of the clips that Gary has shared with me while I've been here. And I just felt it was important to really hammer hard on exactly what's going on, give you a deep dive on what's really happening and what it means. And I think that's one of the big problems that I see in even the Western media is I've been trying to keep an idea on or an eye on as I've been going through this vacation here. And they are just missing the boat in most of it because, like so many of the things in this war, they're talking about the tactical things, the things that are happening on the ground, and they're not giving you any context or telling you what it means in context of the whole war, the capabilities, and all that kind of stuff. We're going to get into that today. But listen, before we get into the issues of war and peace and where this is going, there's something that happened that also Gary shared with me that I find embarrassing as an American and humiliating for senior so-called elite of our government. I'm specifically talking about U.S. Senator Lindsey Graham. He has said some things of late that are shocking for so many different reasons, many of which I'm going to share with you here in a minute. Things that so many in the country apparently are not aware of. And I get that to an extent that some people just don't understand how someone at that senior level could be so badly misinformed, could be so flawed in his understanding of how things work. You just don't believe it can. You don't think it could be that bad. It is. It's even worse than you may think is possible. I'll share some details with you that too. Now, we're going to get into the specifics of what's been going on in this battle in the Kursk region and some of the reasons for why I say it's not going to go good. So you'll understand the ration and the logic behind the contention I make. But here, first of all, I mean, we should really start off with the man himself, Volodymyr Zelensky, the guy who's given the orders here about what he says about what's going on. Now, this is about 48 hours old, but it's still pretty active in terms of what's been going on in the fighting. Here's what he has to say.
Today, there have already been several reports from Commander-in-Chief Syrskyi about the situation on the front and in the areas of our operation in the Kursk region. We are expanding the area of active operations. The Commander-in-Chief reported that our forces control 74 settlements in the Kursk region. Special attention is paid to the Kursk region, and thus to the protection of all our border communities nearby. The more the Russian military presence in the border area is destroyed, the closer peace and real security will be for our country.
Okay, that's just nonsense. I mean, first of all, let's take that in the different pieces here. He said they're expanding their operations here. Evidence on the ground shows that's true. Evidence on the ground shows that it's not just in the apparently somewhere around 1,000 square kilometers of Russian territory where there are Ukrainian troops. And by the way, I need to just clarify the difference between where the Ukraine troops are and territory held. This is something akin to what the Russians did early when they allegedly held 6,000 square kilometers of territory in the Kursk area. But they didn't really, the Kherson area early in 2022. They didn't actually control it. They just had troops in there. So then when it was tested with a big Ukrainian force, it rapidly collapsed and they, quote, recaptured all this territory. Probably we're going to eventually see something like that here. That hasn't happened yet because in similar way that Russia was caught unawares and strategically embarrassed in the Kherson region in 2022, they were caught unawares and embarrassed here in 2024. Because just like what happened in 2022, the Russian side did not detect this big buildup of forces in time to have any troops to defend against it. So the Russian side didn't think there was any chance that Ukraine was going to attack into Russia itself because they know they don't have anywhere near enough troops to do that or the logistics or anything else, which, again, I'll give you some details in a minute. So they didn't put enough troops in there. They lightly defended the border with some frontier guards, which is kind of like partially trained National Guard types from the United States. They didn't have defenses in depth. It was relatively minor. That was a mistake on their part again. And so now then when Ukraine was able to amass a lot of troops without triggering the satellite capabilities, any kind of spies they may have on the ground or drones or anything like that, the Russian side did not detect this relatively large scale assembling of Ukraine troops. So when they crossed into the Russian border area, it completely caught the Russians by surprise. And so they sent what they call these DRG units, which is basically reconnaissance units in force, racing ahead as far as they could so that they could put their flag up and show media pictures, make it look like they were doing a lot. So now they have this map that you've seen, and I'll show you that in a minute, where it looks like a really big area and everyone's saying this is what the Ukraine controls. Well, that's where the Ukraine troops are, but holding territory is a very different thing than just flooding the zone with a lot of people into areas where it was not adequately defended. Now, Russia is in the middle of pulling troops from various locations. We can speculate where they may be coming from. They're keeping that a secret, so it's not clear whether these are from some of these 200,000 or 300,000 troops that have not been in contact that they're bringing in here, whether it's taking some guys off of the other parts of the front line. I've heard reports that both of those are the cases. It's unclear right now, but Russia is amassing troops to come back. Putin has vowed that he will respond to that, and obviously, how could he not? Because he's been embarrassed. He flat out has, and it's been a big morale boost for the Ukraine side. No question about that. However, as I'm going to show you graphically in a second, this is temporary things, and the Ukraine side is almost certainly going to pay a heavy, heavy price for the current good feeling that they're generating right now, for the bump in morale that they have right now, for the bump in the Western media that they're getting right now. This is going to come at a huge, huge cost, because people need to understand that wars are not battles, that media hits are not the same as tactical victories on the battlefield. They are very, very different, even if there are some intercorrelations here, interrelations between the two. We're going to see why that is. But first of all, I want to take a look. I mentioned Lindsey Graham at the beginning and why that was such a problem and an embarrassment for our country. I'd like to show you that. So first of all, this is Lindsey Graham. He went to Ukraine to visit Zelensky and to give his enthusiastic endorsement to what's going on. Watch this one first.
So 2.5 years later, you're still standing and you're in Russia. Remind me not to invade Ukraine. I'm so proud of you, your people, your military, your leadership, your country. You're under siege unlike anything I've seen in my lifetime. They were predicting in Washington that Kyiv would fall in 4 days, the whole country would fall in 3 weeks. Well, they were wrong. And here we are all these months, years later, your people are suffering, they're resilient, and you're in Russia. Bold and brilliant. Taking this war to Putin to make him understand and pay a price is the right thing.
Okay, that's just embarrassing to me, because this is exposing how little he understands what war is. Now, I don't think he can even distinguish between spin, media media exposure, tactics, operations, and strategic views and strategic issues. I don't think he has any idea of any of that. I think he loves the camera, loves to talk, and loves to sound important, and just loves it when all these cameras come on him and he goes on all these TV shows, etc. He's good at that. You can tell by the fact that they keep putting him on. So he translates that in his mind to, I must be really smart because every time I say something, it gets put on the television screen. That cool. If that's your objective, if that's what you want to do, if that's what's important to you, awesome. Problem is, for me, the reason why this makes me so angry is that men are dying because of this in absurdity and humiliation. And it gets a lot worse than that. But there's something I do want to touch on, specifically what he mentioned there, because I keep hearing this a lot. And it's time to explain some of this, because he used something that I've heard President Biden use many occasions too, that they said in Washington that Ukraine was going to fall in 3 days, and that Kiev was going to fall in 3 days and the whole country in 3 weeks. Okay, let's take a look at who actually did say that. Who is they? The they was Biden's then chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Milley, General Milley. He's the one that said that. You see that on your screen there. That's from early February, before the invasion started. He's saying that Kiev could fall within 72 hours if Russia decides to invade. I think one of the reasons why he said that was because, and you may recall that the U.S. government had already moved its embassy out of Kiev into Lvov, and the fear was that it was going to be something, and this is, I think, part of what Putin thought as well, that this was going to be similar to the 1956 Soviet invasion into Hungary, to where as soon as a bunch of tanks rolled up into the capital city and started coming into the country, that they would just realize that they couldn't win a war, and so that then they capitulated. And so I think in that regard, they thought, yeah, the government could capitulate, and then all of a sudden here could come rolling in tanks, and then the whole thing could be over in 72 hours. That was a theoretical possibility. It had happened in the past. But Milley was wrong. Putin was wrong, because Zelensky didn't play his role. Now, his role was supposed to be to recognize the reality that we can't win a war. So instead of having the whole country burned, let's just make a negotiated settlement. That's what Putin expected. And I know that because you see how few troops he put in there. He only put about 40 or 50,000 in the whole Kursk area, the whole Kiev area. And he split another 150,000 or so in other parts of the country for him to make a good media show, to make it look serious. That should have resulted in that. A rational thinking person would have made that calculation then. They would have said, let's seek a negotiated settlement, because when you just compare, who's got the capabilities to win a war, it's not our side. So why fight a battle we can't win? That's what should have happened there. But instead of bragging on them for not coming to that conclusion, now here we are 2.5 years later, and you've burned through hundreds of thousands of Ukraine troops and thousands upon thousands of vehicles that the U.S. that they had on the hand, and now then that the West and the U.S. has given them since. And now then they don't have the capacity anymore to recover from this. Now then all they can do is die in either faster or smaller numbers. That's what's at stake right now. But Graham doesn't understand it. Zelensky apparently still doesn't understand it. He didn't understand it in February 2022, and he doesn't understand it today. He should not be saying at this stage, hey, I'm going to launch an incursion into Russia, and I'm going to brag about how we're going to expand the operation. Folks, you can't invade a country the size of Russia with 15 or 20,000 troops, and they may not even have that many. They may only have 10 or 12,000. I've heard various figures. It's not clear exactly how many, but no matter what that number is, if Russia couldn't take 50,000 and take the one city of Kiev, what does anybody think 10 or 12 or 15 or even 20,000 Ukrainians who are not very well trained, don't have all the logistics that they need, the support that they need, and all that kind of stuff is going to go well up into the country of Russia when they have like 4 to 5 times more troops than the Ukraine side does? It's irrational. But no one wants to look at that in the West. We just want to keep clapping and say, yay, you embarrass Putin. Like embarrassing Putin is a good thing. Like killing some more Russian troops and blowing up stuff on the Russian territory. They're thinking, cool, finally you're paying them back a little bit for all that they have done to Ukraine. And I get it on the surface. That is happening. That is definitely happening. But here's what the problem is going to be. I think that the more likely, the more rational look is going to be that this embarrassment of Putin will be corrected, and that he will take decisive action and hurt Ukraine even more than he would have done before. In early June, he put a negotiating position on the ground. We've talked about this many times. It was nowhere near as good as the one in December of 2021 or the one in Istanbul in April of 2022. It was a lot worse than that, but still only included the 4 territories, the oblasts, that Russia illegally annexed in 2022. But that's all he asked for. Now then, according to the deputy chief of mission for the United Nations, I can't remember his name right off the top of my head, for Russia, as I said, that deal's off the table. It's done. It's never coming back. Any future one will be much worse for the Ukraine side. And here's the thing, folks. They have the capability, the Russians do. They have the wherewithal to make good on that threat. Now then, even if they wanted to say, we're not going to end this anytime this year, it may be another year, maybe a year and a half, maybe 2 years. They have the people, they have the domestic support, they have the industrial support. They can do all of those things. They have the ability to make good on that, and Ukraine doesn't. So now why you want to brag about hey, we made this big incursion into Russia, hurt a lot of their people, caused like a couple 100,000, I think, maybe even more today, to be withdrawn, civilians evacuated from the area. I mean, it's a horrible thing for Russia, no question about it. But the cost to Ukraine for doing this could be enormous. No one is wanting to talk about that, least of all Lindsey Graham. And so now I want to show you the next thing here, because he's saying something that a lot of other people are saying. Oh, well, you know what? F-16's coming to save the day. That's how smart he is. Watch this.
When it comes to F-16s, way too long. They're here. Let's use them. Let's train Ukrainian pilots. When I talked to President Zelensky just a few minutes ago, if you're a retired F-16 pilot and you're looking to fight for freedom, they will hire you here. They're going to look throughout NATO nations for willing fighter pilots who are retired to come help them until they can get their pilots trained. So we're going to get these jets in the air sooner rather than later, and we're looking for pilots who are willing to fight for freedom as the Ukrainians train their own pilots.
Okay, we've talked about the F-16s a lot. So you know that just categorically, even if it was NATO trained, not retired, but NATO trained pilots, there's not enough to make any difference. The Russian side has too good of air defenses. They've got their own fleet, large fleet of aircraft. This is going to have a marginal impact at best, and they probably are going to get shot down not long after they fly, just like the Ukraine jets did. They're not magic. They're not any different than the Ukraine jets that can't fly very much because they get shot down. So there's no magic beans here. These are fighter aircraft that have the same vulnerabilities and maybe slightly better than the Ukraine side, but in some ways they're not even as good because they're not integrated like they are in the United States. That's just on the surface of it. But he admitted something there, because we've been told over and over that the West has been training Ukraine pilots and that they are now graduated, they're ready to go. And now that he says, until the Ukraine pilots get trained, we're looking scouring all over NATO. Well, now, what are you looking all over NATO for if you have Ukraine pilots that are trained and capable and ready to go? Obviously, they don't, or they wouldn't be saying that now. They wouldn't be looking for them. And by the way, if you're looking for a few extra bucks, I'm not sure that flying into the teeth of the Russian air defense and the Russian Air Force with a handful of F-16s is really a good way to make extra cash, because you probably won't be around to spend it. We'll see if they succeed or not. I guess some people may, but here's the thing about that. It's not going to make any difference. And again, another thing, Lindsey Graham doesn't understand or doesn't care. And that's some of the bigger issue here. Now, I'm going to play one more clip from what he said here, kind of stitch together a piece here. That's what's really making me angry, because now we're getting into some moral issues here. Watch this.
The weapons that they're using here are made in America, creating American. The weapons that they're using here are made in America, creating American jobs. And every weapon we give the Ukrainians are used to full effect. We've learned a lot about our own weapon system by providing them to the Ukrainians, what works and what doesn't. So I'm hoping that in December we can have another infusion of weapons provided by the United States to help the Ukrainians fight in 2025.
What I think about Kursk, bold, brilliant, beautiful. Keep it up. Putin started this, kick his ass. Bottom line is, to the administration, I appreciate your support. Let these people fight. Give them weapons they need to win a war they can't afford to lose.
You know, what he sounds like there is like a middle schooler who knows nothing but has a rich daddy. And he has a little uniform at a really ritzy school that he goes to, but he knows nothing himself. And he's cocky and talking all this big nonsense, and he doesn't know himself anything. That's what he's saying there. And it's enraging to me, because what he's basically saying, number one, talking about like, yeah, Putin, kick his ass. I mean, that's so humiliating. That's how a middle schooler talks, who doesn't have to back it up. Yeah, you know, Lindsey's talking about send people over there to fight in these F-16s, to send Ukraine guys fighting into Russia. Cool, go guys. How about you join the ropes? How about you go and join it if it's such a good idea? And then you have the audacity to brag about how this is money for America. And this is money for our weapon systems. And we get to sell more stuff. And we get to use our own stuff and test it out in real combat conditions with somebody else's blood. That should enrage and anger every American who's a genuine patriot. Because we're supposed to stand for the moral right. We're supposed to stand for taking care of people who can't take care of themselves. And folks, sending them off to slaughter is not taking care of the Ukrainian people. It's because here's the thing. Once this is through, once this plays itself out, he's not going to be around anymore. He's not going to be the one standing up. When all the wreckage and all the bodies are buried, he's going to be long gone, pocketed in this cash, because I guarantee you all those arms makers are only too happy to let Lindsey Graham keep having more of this stuff and telling him, yeah, you go, boy, you keep doing it. It's humiliating, and it's angering because of how little human life matters to these people, how little he understands about how wars work. And just because you want to use these cocky phrase like we're going to kick Putin's ass and all this kind of just shameful language that has no bearing on reality at all, and on the graves of, we don't know for sure, potentially hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian men already dead, and now then you're cheerleading on more of them to their graves. Well done, Lindsey. Super. That's a way to make America look good, that we don't care about the lives of anybody. And even though any kind of elementary estimate of how wars work understands that this should have been resolved in February of 2022 at the least cost of life and at the most gain to the Ukraine side going forward. We had plenty of opportunity to do it. But men like Lindsey Graham don't care about that. They're bragging about the money we can make on the backs and blood of other people's armies that can't win, that have no chance of winning. That's one of the reasons I wanted to come and make this episode today, because I didn't want to leave this until I got back. That you need to understand that the fundamentals remain what they were from the beginning, that this is not winnable by the Ukraine. So to do these kinds of things, and this goes as much for Zelensky as it does for Lindsey Graham, he himself, I mean, he's the author of much of this himself, and I think that history will judge him very harshly, as will his own people. He's not going to come out of this like some Churchill figure. I assure you, what anybody may think, time will expose this as the bad things that it was. And when all the history and the backstories that we don't even know about right now come out, it's not going to look good for Zelensky. But now I told you, let's look a little bit at what's happening on the battlefield. Gary, if you could throw that first big map up there, first of all. Okay, this is the front line we talk about a lot. You see it on the far right there. The light red areas there are where Russia controls Ukrainian territory. Then the blue icons and all the other things there on the line of contact at 600 meters. And then in that circle that you see in the center there, that's this newest incursion into Kursk. That's north of the Ukrainian border into Russia. And it's not that small. I'm going to show you a blow up, though. I wanted to just see where it is in relation to the rest of the fighting. This area here with all the blue in it, this is where Ukraine has gone into Russian territory and taken areas out. So they control that right now. And it is, by some reports, up to 1,000 square kilometers. So again, it's not a small piece of territory at all. But the problem is, this is not something that can be sustained. And whether if it's like somewhere between, let's just give them the benefit of the doubt. Let's say that there's 20,000 people, 20,000 troops that are taking part in this. Zelensky said in that last clip that they were going to expand it. So that's where it is right now. But there are some reports that there are large Ukrainian troop mobilizations elsewhere, maybe 100 or so kilometers away from that, farther to the north, that may end up trying to make a new penetration to potentially try and collect and meet in between those two and carve out an even bigger area. So that's one of the reasons I think that also that you saw Russia give the order apparently today to get even more people evacuated out of that area so that they protect their people right there. So they're taking this quite seriously. Now, whenever they get their troops up in there, who knows, we'll see what happens with that and how that works, where they pull them from, et cetera. But I assure you that Russia is going to do this. I mean, any country would. And when you outnumber like 4-1 the other side, you have literally millions of people to pull from. Even if they wanted to mobilize more or call up reserves, they could do it. And whether it's something that's going to happen in a week, a month, 3 months, it's a virtual certainty, Just because Russia has the manpower, they have the ammunition, they have the weapons, they have the industrial capacity, they will be able to resolve this at some point. Now, the question that needs to be answered is, what is Ukraine's objective here? What are they trying to accomplish? Zelensky was really vague in that clip I played right there, and he's been just as vague in any other kinds of comments, but he said something to the effect of, well, I want to bring things into a position where we can have some peace, and so later on, this is going to help with that. But he's categorically said he's not interested in making any kind of negotiated settlement. Now, listen, folks, I mean, just look at this. Just do the math work for me, like a third or fourth grade math. If 45,000 Russian troops, 50,000 Russian troops isn't enough to capture one city of Kiev, then how does anybody think that half of that number, less than half of that number, is going to be able to make a sizable incursion into Russia and hold on to it? Because wars are won and lost primarily on logistics. Now, you got to have a trained force. You have to have an equipped force. You have to have the ability to supply it, the logistics to maintain it, and of course, the ammunition to sustain the combat over a long time. You have to have all that stuff. But if you don't have the logistics to where you can move ammunition up, even if you have all of it, spare parts, and move wounded back down and then bring replacements up, and you be able to hold on to that and to keep a corridor open. If you can't do that, you can't do anything. You can't go, further up into Russia because you have to provide flank security and then be able to roll folks up inside there. But folks, that was a glaring failure in the 2023 invasion, offensive operation that they tried, where they were trying to take back their own territory from Russia. So Russia had good defensive lines, but they had almost air supremacy in the air. Ukraine couldn't fly into Russia. They still can't. Russia had the industrial capacity, so they had 5-6 to 1 ammo advantage. They still do. Now then, they have the air power, so they can bring these they call these FAB bombs, the glide bombs we've talked a lot about, and they're already starting to use that a lot. And I assure you, they're moving more and more of those things in there. They're moving more troops up into there, and soon they're going to have this thing stopped. There's been some slowdown in the gains already. Like I said, they may be breaking a new one, so we'll see how that's going to work out. But at this point, it's slowed down. The more Russia moves troops in there, the more difficult it's going to get to keep the ones that are already there, the Ukraine side, fed, fueled, and ammunition supplied for. Because Russia is already using their glide bombs to launch deep into the Ukraine side to already hit these supply lines right now. And so the longer time goes, the more they hit those, and then the more ground troops get up to the front, and they bring the artillery especially with them, and then the drones and the FPV drones and all that stuff, which have been elsewhere in theater. The minute that they start getting those in order, you see, there's just no way that this works out for the Ukraine side. And if Zelensky has said he's categorically against any negotiated settlement, then what is he trying to accomplish? You can't march on Moscow. You physically don't have the capacity to do that. Nothing even close. You might not even get to the city of Kursk, much less anything beyond that. I mean, it's ridiculous to even suggest that they could, because they don't have any of the things necessary to have it. You have to have air power, at least parity, to be able to launch an offensive like that. And they didn't have it before. They don't have it now. Why do we think we're going to get a different outcome? Upon what is Zelensky, Lindsey Graham, and all these other cheerleaders, upon what are you basing all your hopes for? You caught the Russians sleeping, no question about it. But now they're awake. What do you think is going to happen now? Do you think that Putin is going to be so embarrassed that he's going to be looking for negotiated settlement? I mean, come on, folks. After 2.5 years and thousands of years of Russian history, does somebody in the West genuinely think that Vladimir Putin's going to go, oh, man, wow, we had a tactical setback. I guess we better quit. I guess we better have a negotiated settlement on their terms. That's all you're going to do is enrage him. It's like going into a cave where there was a hibernating bear and punching it in the nose. And while it's trying to get its bearings and it wasn't prepared, you hurt it, but now it's awake. And now that as soon as it shakes off its slumber, it's going to recover its senses. And I think you know what's going to happen next. There's no rational reason to think something different than that's going to happen. The question is, how much time is going to have to pass? How many men has Zelensky and Lindsey Graham sacrificed for we don't even know what? We don't even know. They haven't even said what they're trying to accomplish. I wonder if they've even told their men, hey, look, you're all going to die, but hey, let's go up and at least hurt some Russians in the process. I don't know. I'm sure some would do that. Some probably would, instead of dying on the front line for nothing and just being pushed back further to the west. Maybe some have done that. That's speculation. I haven't heard anything reported on that. That's at least theoretically plausible that some may do that. But that won't go very far because they already had limited reserves as they're being pushed back, especially in the Pokrovsk area, which is of significant importance on that eastern front. If Pokrovsk falls, then a whole bunch of other things become vulnerable, and that's nearly the last of the prepared defensive positions that Ukraine has had going back to the 2015 timeframe. So they've had a lot of time. There's not much behind that. And instead of putting their troops where they had a chance maybe to bloody Russia's nose there and buy more time for negotiating positions, instead now then they're squandering them up here on something that has good Western press in the short term. Sure, and you see it for yourself. You see it does. But it's not going to have any operational significance, much less strategic, because all that's going to do is kill even more of your men, some of your best troops by many of the reports. And now what are you going to have? Once the awakened bear starts moving, and especially in the Pokrovsk area and elsewhere along that line of contact, if they start employing more troops, and now you don't have reserves, what do you think is going to happen there? So instead of taking this bad deal for the Ukraine side that was offered in June, now then they may lose even more territory. They may even lose additional cities before this is all over. Many things are possible, and they're all bad for the Ukraine side. So this was a gamble by Zelensky, but it was something, a gamble of the akin to me, who knows a lot about foreign policy but didn't know anything about how gambling works, going into a casino, taking all of my family savings and saying, I don't know anything about blackjack, but I hear some people win when they play it. So I'm going to put it all on the table and see what happens. You got about the same chance of success, maybe not even that good, but that's the kind of gamble this is. It's an irrational gamble. It's one that doesn't have any chance of success. The Russian Battle of the Bulge, what we call from World War II, and starting in December 1944, that was a gamble. Their people calculated they had about a 10% chance to win. If they had enough fuel and enough tanks, and they were able to get them, and they surprised the Western allies in the United States and Great Britain, France, and all them, and if they had gotten all the way to Antwerp and taken that port, then they could have extended the war many months and maybe had a negotiated settlement. It was at least plausible. They felt they had maybe a 10% chance. They made some pretty good progress, but then all the things I just talked to you about happened. They couldn't support the supply lines. They made this long penetration, but then they couldn't protect the flanks. They ended up getting cut off. They ran out of fuel. They couldn't get enough logistics up there. Logistics killed the offensive for the German side. Logistics. And that's the same thing that's almost certainly going to happen here, because they don't have the military wherewithal to hold those flanks open. So we're going to wait and see how this plays out. It just grieves me to see that, this has been so far, Ukraine men and women and the Ukraine cities are the bill payers. So you have Zelensky making, I don't know what his rationale is. I don't know why he's making these decisions he's making. They just have no chance for success. And the humiliation and shame for me as an American, watching some of the so-called elite of my country care nothing about the men who are bleeding and dying for this, and do care a lot about the money, and bragging about how much our defense industry is going to benefit from this and how cool it's going to be that we can find out how a lot of our weapon systems work, etc. It's shameful. And by the way, Senator, let me just throw one more thing in there that you're also ridiculously unaware of, is that the Russians are also learning how our weapons work. The Chinese are learning how our weapons work, how to defeat them, the HIMARS, the ATACMS, the glide bombs that we have, all of which have been neutralized to large extent because of what the Russians have learned, how to defeat our weapon system. So you want to brag about what we could do, then you need to open your eyes and recognize that you're also harming us, because now our potential biggest adversaries know how to defeat our stuff before we even reach the next battlefield. So why don't you stew on that a little while too, instead of bragging about ridiculous things that show the immorality of our positions here. I'd love to see us get some of that fixed up, but we'll see what the next elections can bring. In the meantime, wanted to bring you all that. I thought it was really important to give you a breath of what's going on, both on the battlefield and off the battlefield, and how things work and how they don't. I'll be back, by the way, for sure on Tuesday the 20th. I'm going to try to do maybe 1 or 2 more shows if I can get Gary up in the middle of the night or something, because the timing here is really strange. But as things happen, I assure you, especially if anything blows up in the Middle East, we'll do whatever it takes to make sure we get on the air to you. But in the meantime, appreciate you guys a lot. I appreciate you guys supporting Larry Johnson, who I'm very thankful for all the help he's been giving me, and Larry. And Gary, who's been taking care of things while I've been gone to make sure you guys continue to stay knowledgeable even while I've been off with family. Really appreciate you a lot. Do again, subscribe and like if you haven't done that already. And I will look forward to seeing you whenever we get back together on Daniel Davis Deep Dive.